Claude responded. The smell of applewood smoke was still hanging in the air when my son-in-law picked up my anniversary pot roast, the one I'd been slow cooking since 6. The smell of applewood smoke was still hanging in the air when my son-in-law picked up my anniversary pot roast, the one I'd been slow cooking since 6 that morning, and dropped it straight into the trash can beside the patio. "Nobody needs that much cholesterol at your age, Walt," he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Everyone went quiet. I stood up, walked over to his brand-new truck parked in my driveway, and poured my glass of sweet tea straight into his gas tank. "Guess we're both wasting things tonight," I said. "Before I tell you how that Sunday ended, let me tell you who I am and how it started. Friends, neighbors, family, however you think of me, I'm glad you're here. Drop a comment and tell me what you'd call the man sitting across the table from you tonight. A few names in this story have been changed, but the lesson underneath them hasn't. My name is Walter Kowalski. I'm 66 years old, a retired machinist, 38 years at a tool and die shop outside Erie, Pennsylvania, before my hands finally told me they were done. I've got a hip that clicks when the weather turns, and a left knee held together with more hardware than the drill press I used to run. None of that matters much on the second Sunday of the month, because that's Family Dinner Sunday, a tradition my wife Doris started 32 years ago, back when our daughter Kelly still needed a booster seat to reach the table. Doris believed in that dinner the way some people believe in Sunday Mass. She'd start the pot roast the night before, iron the good tablecloth, call her sister in Buffalo just to make sure she remembered the date. Doris passed 4 years ago this past March. Ovarian cancer. 11 weeks from the day the doctor said the word to the morning, I held her hand, and she stopped squeezing back. But I never stopped the dinners. I couldn't. Every second Sunday, I pull her recipe card out of the drawer by the stove, the one with the corner burned from an oven mitt fire in 1997, and I follow it word for word. Onions first, then carrots, then the beef, browned on all sides before it ever sees the crock pot. Because Doris said a roast that isn't browned first is just boiled meat pretending to be dinner. That particular Sunday was the second one in October, and I had a 6-pound chuck roast that had been going since sunrise. The kitchen, smelling like Doris, was still standing at the stove instead of me. The backyard looked the way she always wanted it, the picnic table she'd bought secondhand from a church rummage sale in 1993, sanded and restained every spring since, sitting under the maple tree that was just starting to turn orange at the edges. My neighbor, Gene Petrocelli, showed up first, same as he always does, carrying a 6-pack of Ewingling and wearing the same Steelers jacket he's worn to every one of these dinners since 2011. Gene's 71, a retired postal carrier, lived next door to me for 19 years. He was at Doris's funeral. He was at my kitchen table the week after, not saying much, just sitting there so I wouldn't have to sit alone. "Smells like a Sunday, Walt," he said, dropping into his usual spot. "Always does," I told him. My daughter Kelly arrived 20 minutes later with a container of coleslaw, still in her scrubs from a half shift at the hospital where she works as a physical therapist. 34 years old, sharp as her mother, same habit of talking with her hands when she gets excited. Behind her came her husband, Derek Bannister. Derek's 37, works in commercial insurance. The kind of guy who wears a quarter-zip sweater to a backyard barbecue because somewhere he learned that looking a little overdressed reads as successful. He shook my hand the way men do when they want you to feel the grip. "Walt," he said, "smells incredible out here. Help yourself to a beer," I told him. The afternoon went the way good October afternoons do, slow, easy. The Steelers' preseason recap playing low from the garage radio. Gene arguing with my nephew Tommy about whether the Browns had a real shot this year. Kelly told a story about a patient who'd finally taken his first steps after a hip replacement, and her face lit up, talking about it the exact way Doris's used to light up over things that actually mattered. I was laughing at something Tommy said when Derek set his beer down and looked at my plate. I just pulled the roast out of the crock pot, plated it up the way Doris always did, meat in the center. Carrots and onions fanned around it, a little of the broth spooned over the top, when Derek said, loud enough for the table to hear, "That's a lot of red meat for a man your age, Walt. You trying to give yourself a second heart attack?" I hadn't had a first one. Nobody at that table corrected him. "I earned it," I said. Sure, he said, and reached across the table for the pepper. I thought, and his forearm swept clean across my plate. The roast, The carrots, the little dish of horseradish Doris always insisted on, all of it went into the grass. And before I could even react, Derek scooped the whole plate up off the ground and dumped it straight into the trash can 6 feet away like he was doing me a favor. "Nobody needs that much cholesterol at your age, Walt," he said, brushing his hands together like he'd just done something responsible. Nobody laughed. Not Jean, not Tommy, not Kelly. I sat there with my hands flat on the table, feeling the heat climb up through my chest into my throat. 66 years old, and my first instinct was still to smooth it over, apologize for making things awkward, tell everybody it was fine. Doris would have hated that about me. She always said I forgave people faster than they deserved. I looked at the trash can. 30 years of Sunday dinners, and my anniversary roast was sitting on top of a paper towel and an empty chip bag. Then I looked at the driveway, where Derek's brand new F-250 sat gleaming, the one he'd been talking about all through dinner. Financed, he'd mentioned twice. The good way, through the dealership, not some bank. My glass of sweet tea was still sitting on the table, full, untouched. I picked it up. Derek's eyebrows went up. "Walt, what are you doing?" I walked over to his truck. The gas cap was one of those quick-release kinds, no lock, sitting right there behind a little flap on the driver's side. I popped it open, held the glass over the opening for 1 second, and poured the whole thing in. It made a small, quiet, satisfying sound going down. I screwed the cap back on and turned around. "Guess we're both wasting things tonight," I said. Derek's face went the color of the paper towel my roast was sitting on. He came off his chair so fast it nearly tipped over. "Are you out of your mind? That's a $2,000 motor." "Probably not," I said. Kelly was on her feet, still holding her fork, staring at me with a look I hadn't seen since she was 15, and I wouldn't let her go to a concert 2 hours away on a school night. Not worry, something closer to embarrassment. "Dad," she said, and the way she said it told me everything about which direction the rest of the night was going to go. Derek was pacing by the truck, both hands pressed to his head. "Do you have any idea what sugar does to a fuel system? That's not a joke, Walt. Wasn't trying to be funny," Jean said from the table, calm as anything, cracking open another Yuengling. "That's what he said." Derek pointed at him. "Stay out of it." "Just agreeing with the man," Jean said, and took a long drink. I sat back down and looked at my empty plate. The afternoon had gone quiet in that particular way that has nothing to do with peace, the quiet of a yard where everybody's waiting for somebody else to say the thing nobody wants to say. Kelly was still staring at me, jaw tight, and in all the noise of Derek pacing and Tommy studying the grass like it held answers, I realized my daughter hadn't once asked if I was all right. The last car pulled out around 7. I stood on the back porch and listened to the neighborhood settle a lawnmower 2 streets over. Somebody's kids shooting hoops, the particular eerie and October sound of a whole street trying to convince itself that everything's fine. I went inside and started cleaning up, the way I do every second Sunday, stacking plates, wrapping leftovers, scrubbing the crock pot while the water's still hot enough to loosen the char. Doris used to stand next to me at the sink drying whatever I washed, talking about the afternoon. I could still feel the shape of her missing, the way your tongue keeps checking a tooth that isn't there anymore. My phone rang while I was rinsing the crock-pot lid. "Kelly." "Hey, sweetheart," I said. "Dad." Her voice was tight, careful, the physical therapy voice she uses on patients who don't want to hear bad news. "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "The truck. Do you have any idea what a fuel system flush costs?" Derek already called the dealership. They're saying $1,200, maybe more if it damaged the injectors. I set the dish towel down. Outside, somebody's dog started barking at nothing. "I imagine it costs what it costs," I said. "Dad, he threw your dinner in the trash," I said. "I know what happened. I was standing right there." "I know you were there," she said. "But you pouring tea in his gas tank, that doesn't make it better. It just makes everything more complicated." I pulled out my chair at the kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg Doris kept meaning to fix and never got to. Across from me, her chair sat empty. Same faded cushion from the discount store. Same scratch on the leg where Kelly used to kick it as a kid. "Sweetheart," I said. "You called me tonight, after what happened at that table, and your first question was about the truck." The line went quiet enough, I could hear her breathing. I'm asking because Derek's upset, she said finally. Derek threw my food in the garbage and told me I was too old for red meat, I said. At a table your mother bought for this family 30 years ago, in front of Jean and Tommy and everybody else. I'm not asking you to pick a side, Kelly. I'm just telling you what happened. I know what happened, she said. And now there was something strained in her voice, something that sounded less like anger at me and more like a woman who'd been holding two things together for a long time and was starting to feel the weight. He'll come around, she said. He just needs time. Okay, I said. So you'll think about the truck? I looked at Doris's empty chair. I'll think about it, I said. We hung up. I sat at that table a long while in the particular quiet of a house where somebody used to be and isn't anymore. Doris used to say you learn everything about a person's priorities by watching what they do in the first 5 minutes after a crisis. Not what they say, what they do. Kelly's first call had been to me. Her first question had been about a truck. 2 weeks passed, the way uncomfortable weeks do when you're 66 and retired and living alone in a house full of quiet, slow in the mornings, faster in the afternoons, and then suddenly it's the second Sunday again, and nobody's called. Kelly texted twice, both times about Derek, how upset he still was, how the dealership had confirmed the repair cost. I was thinking about other things. The first visit came on a Wednesday, 10 days after the barbecue. I was in the garage changing the oil on my old Silverado when Derek's truck pulled into the driveway, freshly detailed, not a drop of sweet tea visible anywhere, which told me he'd already had it flushed and cleaned at his own expense before he ever brought it up with me again. He climbed out alone, sleeves rolled up, hands in his pockets, the relaxed version of Derek, the one he brings out when he wants something. Walt, he said, crouching down by the truck like he was interested in the oil pan. How you holding up? Truck's running fine, I said, not looking up. He laughed, like I'd made a joke. Listen, I wanted to clear the air a little. Things got out of hand. Things got thrown in a garbage can, I said. His jaw tightened, but the smile held. Fair enough. He stood, looked around my garage, the tools on the pegboard, the photo of me and Doris at our 20th anniversary, still sitting on the workbench, the way a man's eyes move across a room when he's estimating square footage rather than admiring it. You know, he said, the market up in this part of Erie is genuinely wild right now. Houses on this street going for numbers that would have seemed crazy 5 years ago. I pulled the drain plug and let the old oil run black and slow into the pan. That right? House 2 streets over, similar lot, sold in 6 days last month. 240. Cash offer, no inspection. Good for them, I said. You're sitting on a real asset here, Walt. Equity most guys your age would. Derek, I said, and set the wrench down, looking at him directly for the first time since he'd pulled up. I laid the block for this garage myself in 1998. Poured that slab on a Saturday in July because the contractor quoted me triple what the concrete cost. This house isn't an asset. It's where I live. He held my eyes a second, then looked away first. I understand that, he said. I'm just thinking about your future. I'll let you know when I need help thinking about my future, I said, and went back to work. He left 5 minutes later. The second visit came the following Saturday, and this time Kelly was with him. She brought coffee from the good place downtown, hugged me at the door, said she'd missed me, which made my chest ache because I believed her. We sat on the back porch. The conversation started easy. Kelly talked about a young patient, a teenager who'd finally walked again after a car accident, and her face when she talked about that kid looked exactly like Doris's used to look when something genuinely good happened in the world. Then Derek set his cup down. Kelly and I have been talking, he said, about the future, long-term planning. He pulled out his phone, turned it to face me. Clean photographs, wide hallways, smiling older folks, a dining room that looked like a hotel lobby. There's a place, up near Meadville, Bellwood Commons. It's not what you're picturing, Walt. I'm not moving to Meadville, I said. Just hear me out, Derek said. Kelly leaned forward, and I could see it cost her something. Dad, we're not saying you have to do anything. We're just saying this house is a lot for one person. The yard alone. I like the yard, I said. Keeps me busy. She looked at Derek. Derek looked at her. That particular married couple glance that lasts less than a second, and contains an entire conversation. "Daddy," she said, the word she only pulls out when she's really reaching for something. "We love you. We just want what's best." "I know you do," I said, and I meant it. God help me, I meant every word. But I also knew Derek Bannister had stood in my garage 2 weeks earlier talking about equity and square footage. And now he'd shown up with brochures for a retirement community 90 minutes north, and those two things did not feel like a coincidence. I drove them out after lunch, stood on the porch watching Derek's truck back down the driveway, Kelly's hand visible through the window, raised in a small wave that felt like it was asking for something I didn't know how to give yet. Back inside, I sat with my second cup of coffee and thought about the way his eyes had moved around my garage. In 38 years working a tool and die shop, you learn to feel a crack in a part before you ever see it. Something was wrong. I didn't have proof yet. That Saturday morning, Gene knocked on my back door the way he always does, twice, then letting himself in before I could answer. He had his coffee thermos in one hand, his Steelers jacket over his arm, even though it wasn't cold yet, turning something over in his mind the way he does when he's got something to say and isn't sure how to start. "You got a minute, Walt?" "Got the whole morning," I said. "Sit down." He sat across from me, set his thermos down, and looked at Doris's recipe box on the counter for a second without saying anything about it. That was one of the things I'd always appreciated about Gene. He doesn't fill silence just to fill it. "Been going back and forth about telling you something," he said. "Sat on it a few weeks. Finally figured sitting on it longer wasn't doing you any favors. Tell me." He turned his cap over in his hands, then set it flat on the table. "Month or so ago, this'd be early September, maybe a week before that Sunday, I was out front trimming the hedge along the property line. You know how it gets if you let it go." "I know," I said. Derek pulled up. Gene said, "In that truck of his, before it was new, the older one, had a fella with him, younger guy, maybe 30, dressed like he had a listing appointment. Dark blazer, one of those little tablet folders under his arm." Gene paused. "They walked your whole property line, Walt, front, side, all the way around, back by the fence." Younger guy was tapping notes into his phone the whole time. Derek was pointing things out the roofline, the lot size, the garage. I felt something go still in my chest. Figured maybe he was getting a repair estimate, Gene said. Almost didn't think twice about it. He looked at me straight on. Then I heard what Derek said. What did he say? Gene's jaw tightened the way it does when a man's repeated something in his own head so many times it started to taste bad. He said, "Once the old man's in assisted living, this place clears 240 easy. Brett, run the comps by next week." The kitchen went very quiet. I heard the fridge hum. I heard a car go by out front. "Gene, you sure about the words?" "I was 15 feet away," Gene said. "Hedge don't make noise, and I've still got both ears." I nodded slowly. "Left a business card in your mailbox on the way out, too," Gene said. "Saw him do it. Thought that was strange, leaving a card at a house that isn't for sale." He reached into his shirt pocket and set it on the table beside Doris's recipe box. White card, clean type. "Brett Sokol, Keystone Realty Group, Erie, PA. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," Gene said, his voice going rough at the edges. Kept thinking maybe I misheard something. "You didn't mishear anything," I said. "No," Gene said. "I didn't." We sat there a while, the way men our age sit together when something heavy's just landed on the table between them. I turned the card over in my fingers. "Derek's been here twice in 2 weeks," I said. "Talking about the market, my equity." Brought Kelly by with a brochure for a place near Meadville. Gene's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "That tracks," he said quietly. "Yeah," I said. "It does." I set the card down on top of Doris's recipe box, right next to the index card where she'd written her pot roast recipe in her own looping hand. 2 very different sets of instructions for the same house. "Walt," Gene said. "What are you going to do?" I looked at him. Outside, a blue jay landed on the fence for a second, then was gone. "I'm going to think about it carefully," I said. "And then I'm going to do something about it." That Monday, I went to see Arthur Weiss. Doris and I had used him 3 years back to handle her estate, a small office above a title company on State Street, 3 blocks from the courthouse, smelling the same way it had then: old wood, coffee, a little lemon polish, the smell of a place where serious things get handled seriously. Arthur's 60, trim, gray at the temples, unhurried in the way of a man whose learned urgency rarely improves a legal situation. "Walt," he said, standing to shake my hand, "good to see you. Wish it were better circumstances." I told him everything, the roast, the truck, the visits, the brochure, what Jean had heard, the business card. I told it in order, no editorializing, the way I'd written it out the night before on a legal pad. Arthur listened, without expression, taking notes. When I finished, he set his pen down. "Derek Bannister has contacted my office," he said. My hands tightened on the arms of the chair. "3 times," Arthur said, "over the last 2 months." He opened a folder, a call log, in his assistant's handwriting. "First call in August. He identified himself as your son-in-law, said he had general estate planning questions. Asked what happens to a homeowner's property if the owner's declared legally incapacitated. Who controls the asset? Whether family can initiate a sale." My jaw tightened. Second call 2 weeks later. Asked about Pennsylvania's probate process. How long it takes to transfer a deed after an owner passes, whether it can be expedited. So he's asking how long it'll take to get his hands on my house. "One interpretation," Arthur said carefully. Third call, 6 weeks ago. Asked whether a family member can petition for guardianship over an elderly parent showing, he checked the log, early signs of cognitive decline. Asked what medical documentation that would require. I stood up from the chair without meaning to. "He's not waiting for me to die," I said. "He's building a case to have me declared incompetent." Arthur looked at me steadily. "I think you should sit down, Walt." I sat. "I want to be precise," Arthur said. "I don't know Derek Bannister's intentions for certain. What I know is the questions he asked, in that sequence, represent a fairly coherent line of inquiry into how an elderly homeowner can be separated from control of his property while he's still alive. That's not a standard set of questions from a concerned son-in-law." "No," I said, "it isn't." Arthur reached for a thicker folder. Under Pennsylvania law, I had more options than Derek apparently thought I did. A revocable living trust would move the house into an independent trustee's control, Arthur himself, while keeping me as the beneficiary for life. Fully legal, fully reversible, and it would make any guardianship petition over the house essentially meaningless. An updated healthcare directive would name exactly who had authority over my care decisions if I couldn't make them myself. A revised will would close every gap Derek had been probing. "Start today," I said. In the weeks that followed, I did something Arthur hadn't suggested but hadn't discouraged either. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. I looked it up twice, then had Arthur confirm it. I started keeping my phone in my shirt pocket, voice memo running, whenever Derek came around. The first recording caught him standing in my kitchen, talking about a development going in off Route 19, calling my house "this property" once, and the Colfax Street asset, once not my home, an asset. The second was a phone call about Bellwood Commons having a waiting list, how we ought to get my name on it, sooner rather than later. I emailed both to Arthur. By the middle of November, the trust was signed, the healthcare directive filed, the will updated and witnessed. Arthur kept the originals in his office safe. I kept copies in a fireproof box in the garage, behind the shelf where I keep motor oil, in the exact spot Doris had always wanted me to use for important papers, and I'd always used for spare sockets. She would have found that funny. The text came on a Thursday evening in late November while I was sitting on the porch watching the light go out of the sky. "Kelly. Dad, Derek thinks it'd be nice to do a family dinner like we used to. Get everyone together. It's been too long. Are you up for it? 2 weeks from Sunday?" I read it 3 times. "Ryan thinks it would be nice." No, wait. Wrong name in my head. I mean, Derek thinks it would be nice. Not we think. Just Derek. She'd written it without seeming to notice the distinction, but it was there. I called Arthur that night. "Derek's organizing a family dinner," I said. 2 weeks out. Wants everyone there. How many people? Family, neighbors. Could be 10, 12. And you think he means to use it to pressure you? "I think he means to corner me," I said. "There's a difference. Pressure's what he's been doing for 2 months. Cornering is doing it in front of an audience, so I can't say no without looking unreasonable." Arthur was quiet a moment. "How? What do you want to do?" "I want to say yes," I said, and I want you there." The silence on his end had a different quality now. "You understand," he said slowly. "If I show up at a family dinner in my professional capacity, Derek will know immediately something's changed." "I'm counting on it," I said. "He'll be defensive, possibly hostile." "He was going to be that anyway," I said. "The difference is, when he gets hostile, everything I need will already be on the table." Arthur made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You've been thinking about this." "I've had 2 months and a lot of quiet evenings." "All right," he said, his voice settling into its professional register. "I'll be there, but I want to be clear. I'm not coming to ambush anyone. I'm coming to present facts, documented, verifiable. Whatever Derek does with them is his choice." "What time?" "Say 3. I'll come around back." "I'll start the roast at noon," I said. "And Walt, cook enough. Haven't had a proper Sunday dinner since my brother-in-law moved to Florida." I almost smiled at that. The Sunday came in cold and clear. The maple in the backyard bare now, its leaves raked into a pile along the fence line the way Doris always liked it done before the first family gathering of late fall. My sister Marlene drove up from Pittsburgh with her husband and a dish of pierogi, hugged me a beat too long the way she has since the funeral. My nephew Tommy showed up early to help set the folding chairs. Jean came through the gap in the hedge at 2:45, thermos in one hand, a store-bought pie in the other, sat in his usual chair without a word. Kelly and Derek arrived at 2. Derek came through the gate in a quarter zip and pressed slacks, carrying a leather portfolio a size too formal for a backyard dinner, his eyes sweeping the yard the second he stepped in, counting heads the way a man counts a room when he wants to know if the numbers favor him. He spotted Jean and something flickered across his face for half a second. Kelly walked behind him, one hand resting on her stomach in a way I hadn't quite let myself notice yet. "Hi, Dad," she said, kissing my cheek, her voice carrying more weight than 2 words should. "You look beautiful," I told her. "Your mother's roast," I said. "Same as always." Derek shook my hand with that same deliberate grip. "Walt, this is wonderful. Really, this is exactly what we all needed." We ate at 2:30. The roast was good, Doris's recipe doing what it had done every second Sunday for 30 years. Marlene said it tasted like 1,995. Derek ate and smiled and made conversation, one hand resting on top of his portfolio the whole time, the way a man keeps a hand near something he knows he'll need soon. Around 3:30, plates were being cleared, coffee going around a second time, Tommy telling a story about a roofing job that had everybody laughing, when Derek reached into his portfolio and pulled out a folder, thick, cream-colored. The laughter tapered off the way it does when a room senses a change in temperature. "I hope nobody minds," Derek said, his voice warm and measured, rehearsed. "But I wanted to take a few minutes while everyone's here, people who love Walt, to talk about something important." Nobody moved to stop him. He opened the folder. "Walt has meant everything to this family," he began. "He built this home. He raised an incredible woman." He glanced at Kelly. "And now that he's getting older, we all just want to make sure he's protected." He laid his hand flat on the folder. "The house would go through a managed sale. Walt would move to Bellwood Commons. I've toured it myself. It's genuinely exceptional. Proceeds would fund his care. Anything left over goes to Kelly." He slid the folder forward. Kelly reached across and put her hand over mine, fingers trembling, eyes red at the rims. "Daddy," she said softly, "please, just look at it. For the baby, so we know you're secure." The word landed in me before I even had time to react to it, the baby, and for 1 second I understood I was about to learn 2 things at once. I looked at Kelly's hand over mine. I looked at the folder. I looked at Derek, watching me with the calm confidence of a man who believes the outcome is already decided. "Okay," I said. "Quiet. Just a word. No more weight than its 2 letters. That's when the back gate creaked. It had made that same creak for 15 years, the one I kept meaning to oil. Every head turned. Arthur Weiss stepped into the yard in a gray sport coat, briefcase in hand, moving like a man who'd arrived at exactly the moment he intended to. "Good afternoon," he said pleasantly. "To the table, to no one in particular." His eyes found mine. I gave him the same small nod he'd given me across his desk a dozen times. Derek's pen stopped moving. "Who is this?" "This," I said, looking at Derek across the folder, across the years, Across every second Sunday dinner this table had ever held is my attorney. The warmth drained out of Derek's face the way it drains from a performance when the performer realizes the audience already knows the ending. Arthur set his briefcase on the corner of the table, unlatched it 2 clean clicks, the loudest sound in the yard, and looked at Derek. "Mr. Bannister, I'm glad you thought to get everyone together today. Saves us all a good deal of time. This is a family dinner," Derek said, standing halfway, color coming back into his face as something harder. "Whatever this is, sit down, Derek," I said, not loud. He looked at me, then at Arthur, then at the briefcase, and sat. Arthur addressed the table. "My name is Arthur Weiss. I've represented Walt Kowalski for several years, most recently regarding his wife's estate." He paused. "Over the past 3 months, a pattern of activity has come to Walt's attention that concerns his legal rights as a homeowner and a competent adult. He's asked me to share the facts with everyone who loves him." He looked at Derek. "All of them." He opened the first folder. "Mr. Bannister contacted my office on 3 occasions between August and October of this year. He read the dates, the questions, word for word, the incapacitation question, the probate timeline, the guardianship petition, and its language about cognitive decline." Marlene made a sound that wasn't a word. Kelly's coffee cup touched the table with a sharp click. "Those were hypothetical," Derek said, his voice tight. "I work in insurance. I think about liability professionally." "Mr. Bannister," Arthur said, not raising his voice at all. "I've practiced law in this county for 26 years. Hypothetical questions about a specific elderly homeowner's competency, asked by that homeowner's son-in-law over 3 months, are not hypothetical." Kelly turned and looked at her husband, not with the uncertain look from before, but something else entirely. "You called his lawyer," she said, "and asked how to have my father declared incompetent." "Kelly, I was planning ahead, for us, for the baby," she said, and her voice cracked. "You were doing this while I was pregnant with your child, and you knew it." Arthur opened the second folder, laid the recording transcripts on the table, the Colfax Street asset line, the Bellwood waiting list call. Then Gene stood, set his thermos down with a soft, deliberate sound, and told the whole yard exactly what he'd heard by the hedge that September morning, word for word, the way he'd told it to me in my kitchen. "Once the old man's in assisted living, this place clears 240. Brett, run the comps by next week." Marlene's palm came down flat on the table. Kelly pressed both hands over her mouth. "You called me the old man," I said quietly. Derek's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Walt, I was speaking loosely. It was a professional. You were standing on my property," I said, "telling a stranger my house would pay for something, and then you came inside and ate my food and told me you were worried about my future." The gate creaked again. A young man in a dark blazer stood at the latch, portfolio under his arm, face flushed with the particular discomfort of somebody living in the first seconds of a hard decision. "I'm sorry," he said, not looking at Derek, looking at Kelly. "Who are you?" Marlene asked, though she clearly already knew. "That's Brett," I said. "The one Derek hired to price this house before he ever told me any of this was happening." Brett nodded once, like a man accepting a fair sentence. "I ran the comps," he said. "Didn't know at the time the owner didn't know. When I found out, I told Derek I was out. That was 2 months ago. I should have come sooner." "Brett, this isn't the time," Derek started. "I've had enough time feeling bad about it," Brett said. "You haven't." Kelly turned back to her husband, and there was nothing uncertain left in her face at all. "How much do you owe somebody?" she asked. "Kelly, this isn't—" "How much, Derek?" His shoulders finally dropped, the performance giving out all at once. $190,000, he said. "Give or take. A land deal near Medville that went bad 18 months ago. Arc." The number sat on the table beside Arthur's folders and Marlene's untouched pierogi, and it stayed there in the cold November light while nobody said anything for a long moment. Then I stood up slowly, my knee taking its time the way it always does, and Marlene put a hand on my shoulder until I was fully upright. I looked at the picnic table, not at Derek, not at the folders, at the wood itself, worn smooth in the places where 30 years of plates and elbows had gone. 30 years ago, I said, Doris found this table at a rummage sale and made me carry it 3 blocks, because she wouldn't wait for the truck. The next Sunday, we had our first family dinner at it. Kelly was 4, got so much gravy on her dress, her mother laughed for a week. I let that sit. Every second Sunday since, this table's been here. Through Kelly's graduation, through her wedding day, through Doris getting sick and the Sundays that got quieter, through the one Sunday we didn't have because she was gone, and every one I kept having anyway because she told me to. My throat tightened, and I let it. Kelly, I said, I know you've been caught in the middle of something that wasn't fair to put you in. I'm not asking you to choose anything today. I'm just asking you to know this was never about the house. It was about you sitting across from me eating food your mother taught me to make, knowing there was always a place that was yours. Kelly pressed both hands over her face and her shoulders shook, and this time she didn't try to stop it. I turned to Derek. I don't hate you, I said. I don't understand why you thought this was all right, because I don't. But I'm 66 years old, and I've lived long enough to know hating somebody costs more than it returns. I picked up the folded proposal and set it back down in front of him. I'm not signing this. I'm not moving to Meadville. This house is where Doris and I raised our daughter, and it'll be here every second Sunday for as long as I can stand at that stove. I paused. But there won't be a seat at this table for you anymore. Derek looked at the folder, then at Kelly, who wasn't looking at him at all. He stood, picked up his portfolio, straightened his collar out of habit, walked to the gate. It creaked one more time, and he was gone. Nobody watched him go. Jean reached for the serving spoon. Still half a roast on that platter, he said, in the voice of a man raising a practical matter. Marlene laughed, surprised, the kind that arrives before you've decided to let it, and something in the yard loosened. Tommy got up and checked the fire in the pit without being asked. Kelly stayed in her chair a long while, hands in her lap, palms up. I sat down beside her, not in Doris's chair, in mine, the one next to it. I don't know what I'm going to do, she said quietly. You don't have to know today, I told her. The baby's going to need a grandfather, she said. The baby's going to have one, I said. Every second Sunday right here. She reached over and took my hand and held on. Jean set a plate down in front of me. Roast, carrots, onions fanned just right, a little broth spooned over the top. Don't let it get cold, he said, like a man whose part was done. I picked up my fork. The food was warm. The maple held its bare branches against a gray, eerie sky the same way it had for 30 years, through everything. I took the first bite, and it tasted exactly like a second Sunday is supposed to taste. Here's what I learned. Something I should have understood 30 years earlier but needed a wasted roast and a tank of ruined gasoline to finally see clean. Kindness isn't the same as permission, and keeping the peace isn't the same as having it. I spent years telling myself silence was protecting my family. Silence isn't protection. It's just a slower way of losing everything. If I could go back, I'd tell myself one thing. Don't wait until somebody's standing in your driveway, pricing your life before you decide it's worth defending. I believe the right people show up at the right time for a reason. Jean was trimming that hedge for a reason. Arthur picked up that phone for a reason. And every person at that table on that Sunday was there for a reason too. The moment I'll carry from all of this isn't the confrontation, isn't the folders or the recordings or Derek walking out that gate. It's Kelly beside me, holding my hand, telling me her baby is going to need a grandfather. That's the only kind of getting even worth talking about, not the kind that tears down, the kind that builds back up. If something in this story found you today, tell me where you're listening from, and tell somebody who needs to hear it. I'll be right here next Sunday, same table, same stove. Thanks for staying till the end, Claude responded. A quiet table can hold more truth than any argument shouted across it. A quiet table can hold more truth than any argument shouted across it. Protecting what you love isn't about winning. It's about staying steady long enough for the people who matter to see clearly who was there all along. Love your family with your whole heart, but never confuse silence for peace. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply keep a seat open and let the rest sort itself out. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI purely for entertainment, though we hope its gentle life lesson still found a place in your heart.